it's good to note that the Nigeria DARES is the first effective energy access project under the M300. It emphasizes that leadership role that Nigeria is really taking in energy access.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Connecting the Dots, a podcast where we engage with change makers in the energy industry. Today's episode is especially exciting as we spotlight Mission 300, a bold continent-wide initiative led by the World Bank Group and African Development Bank, aiming to connect 300 million Africans to electricity by the year 2030. To help us unpack this topic, we're joined by someone deeply involved in the journey, the head of the Nigeria Electrification Program, Olufemi Akinyelure. Femi, could you please introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you very much, Emeka. My name is Olufemi Akinyelure. I'm the head of the Nigeria Electrification Program at the Rural Electrification Agency. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I know you're quite busy. If you just walk us through the journey you've taken, what inspired your involvement with Nigeria's energy access space, and what has it meant to lead NEP?
So my journey so far, really, over my career, has been hinged around improving the human condition across board through provision of power, whether it was in Lagos State, where I started my career. I was part of the team that developed the first few IPPs in Lagos. And that was at a time where there was a lot of talk around whether the decentralization would work, whether it wouldn't work. But we had a very dynamic team that was able to establish about 5 IPPs in Lagos at the time. That really opened my mind to the need and what just having access to power could do to change one's life, because we went through the very basics of going out there to carry out energy audits, which I did personally. So just having that experience firsthand of what was going on at the time, meeting with people, discussing with people, seeing how they were using power, and going into hospitals and seeing the impact of not having power, what that could do, being the difference between life and death, for me, just made it so much more important to get this done. The NEP in itself, I was also part of the team that implemented the first negotiation for the World Bank Program. And that was at a time where really there was a lot of skepticism in the space around first the technology, the design of the projects and things like that. But I'm happy today to see that over the past few years, we've been able to create that confidence in the ecosystem. There's been a journey, and that journey obviously has in itself had its own ups and downs. But today you would agree with me that the success story is still being written, right? And we're planning to scale that up. So just a simple way of answering your question is, improving the human condition and just, being able to be part of that story is really inspiring. So coming back to head this program is really like a homecoming for me, right? And I'm only just so happy to continue to expand on what we started.
That's a really good way to summarize it. It's very similar to the goal of next year and the motto we go by, which is to build a society that we want to live in. So that boils down to, if you don't have the human capacity in that society, then you definitely don't want to live there. So I'm glad that our goals and our mottos align. NEP was a really innovative program that was the first of its kind, almost $1 billion committed. And the program was such a success that we are now in the DARES program. There must have been some lessons learned from the previous program to where we are going to on DARES. Could you mind sharing 3 or so lessons learned from NEP to DARES?
I think one of the critical lessons that I would say, it's good to start with this, is that when it comes to provision of energy access, looking at the design of project really isn't the end, it's only a means. And what I mean by that is we would never get the perfect design. We would never get the perfect product, right? But just get it done. Ensure that people get that access, obviously within reasonable doubt. And I say this because there were a lot of ups and downs, but that did not stop the success that we achieved at the end of the day. So even as we are trying to scale on what we've already done, there will be new challenges. And I say this with a lot of countries, other countries in mind that are trying to follow suit or follow the same trajectory. That look, you'd never get a perfect scenario. You just need to continue to iterate along the way. Another key lesson learned is around data capture, just data, right? The importance of data is really underestimated on a lot of these projects. And it's not just on the government side or on the public sector side. It's also for the developers as well on the private sector side. There's this trust issue, I would say, in how much data developers want to present or how much data they want to give back to the government. But I think right now we've passed the stage where we're hiding stuff from each other because we both need that data to be able to design projects better, right? To be able to design projects in such a way that the private sector themselves have access to the required funds that they need to achieve the required scale. We're in a world where carbon trading is also taking a major part in climate finance or financing generally. And in order for us to be able to access a lot of this financing platforms, data is just at the core of everything. In order for us to be able to improve on technology, right, to be able to accommodate even more technology, in order for us to be able to continue to iterate on our least cost model of energizing any community, you need to do that by gathering data. The other point to note is around productive use. When we look at energy access, what type of access are we even speaking about? What is our definition of access? Because I've noticed that the definition of access has a direct correlation with how we design our projects or how we set our targets for those projects, right? Are we saying that just providing a light bulb, right, is access? Or we are focused more around productivity? My recommendation, just over my experience over the past few years, is that limited public resources should be tailored towards productivity, right? Should be tailored towards us gaining some form of economic development through whatever energy is being provided. This is how these projects even can get sustainable in terms of when you're speaking of sustainability. And I would anchor on sustainability to say that lessons learned in that area also look into how developers have evolved over time. When you speak to financiers, the first question is, okay, do you have the right type of projects? Do you have the project pipelines? And closely followed is asking you, look, do you have the right type of developers that we can invest in? So helping developers to also improve their corporate governance, working them through it to some form of capacity building to ensure that we have a critical mass of expertise to actually implement the skill that we require. The other thing I spoke about just now is around financing and ensuring that we're able to unlock local currency financing as much as possible. This is what we actually require to scale, because we're not going to do it through foreign currencies and stuff like that. You open yourself up to all kinds of risks all over again. And the last part of this is very dear to me in terms of how sustainable this project should be. So in the NEP, we were focused around ensuring that we could even create that ecosystem, right? So it didn't even really matter, so much around the OEMs and, their footprint within country. We were focused around, look, let's just get this project going. But right now, we are focused around scale, right? And for you to be able to ensure that those projects are sustainable and actually do what they're meant to do for the life cycle of those equipment's lifespans, we need to ensure that we're encouraging OEMs that have a healthy footprint in country to be able to provide those services. You can't have a project where you use OEMs that if you have any form of downtime, you have to wait a few weeks, a few months to get any form of support from outside of the shores of the country or even Africa, right? And we have to be intentional about it when we are speaking about localization. You can't get people to establish all at once, but you can start to break that chain of having different lines of their assembly lines coming in, starting from this serviceability, ensuring they can establish service centers within our country, right? The problem that we have as Nigeria, being the country with the highest numbers in terms of unserved or underserved, is really an opportunity for us to be able to attract this expertise in country to serve Africa, speaking to the Mission 300, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And it's really interesting from a point of view of what is required, because I think a number of renewable energy projects that have been done over the past 10 years, even at the federal level, lack a sustainability plan. So drilling down on this further, how did you really push this conversation to ensure that sustainability drives the day?
So again, it goes back into the design of the projects, right? So what do we have control of? Using the program that has been approved, how have you designed your criteria for eligibility, right? Going down very granular. First things first, looking into the business plan of the developers for any community. Developers must see the provision of these mini grids as a service. So they're offering a service. And I often say that I don't think there's any community that is unviable. You just haven't shown them or sensitized them around how to use the energy that they have. So we need to, from the point of the project design, to say that, look, when we're looking through your business plans, we want to see how you incorporate productive use cases within that business plan as we go along. Because again, one lesson was that we saw a lot of cases of capacity underutilization in the net. So we had situations where developers again had to go out there to encourage deployment of productive use equipment to see how those communities could leverage off of the mini grids to be productive. So in terms of the sustainability plan and what steps we're taking, that's one critical aspect of it. And then in the other side of technology, right, is what I've just mentioned, ensuring that OEMs that are used have a critical mass of their footprint of serviceability within country. It's very important. It translates directly to the amount of downtime that you have. It translates directly to how your warranties are processed and your warranties are activated over time, right? So these are critical aspects of this sustainability plan that are actionable, right? Because you don't just want to have a plan that is just a plan on my table. You want to have very actionable deliverables that can lead towards that sustainability. And that's why we continue to have our monitoring and evaluation and continue to study the implementation and the operationalization of these mini grids over time, constantly coming up with different points or different pointers that we need to change or we need to add to ensure that these mini grids really do deliver across the lifespan of the equipment. One key thing to say here, though, is that if you look at how long we've spent in this off-grid space so far, I'll say it's about 5-6 years, right? If you look at 5-6 years to the lifespan of a typical BESS or battery storage system, which is meant to last 7 to 10 years, you begin to realize that we're really just about to start testing, the issue of sustainability on a lot of the projects that had been deployed, say 3-4 years ago. So again, that is an opportunity. That's a unique position for Nigeria to begin to learn from those projects that had been deployed. And it's one key thing that we are actively doing at the Nigeria Electrification Program, that as we are looking forward, we're also looking backwards, using technology, new sets of technology that we are putting in place to ensure that we're able to track the operations of projects that had been deployed even years ago. So it's work in progress as we go along.
That's really good to hear. Could you maybe share a bit more around the impact and how to track some of these progresses? There's been a legacy photo book that was launched specifically on the NEP project. I know NEP impacted millions and millions of lives. Is there a specific story or an example of impact that you would like to share with the audience?
So in terms of impact, I would like to start by even explaining why we did the book or how we came up with that. So upon resumption, we were at the point where we were about to start going through the effectiveness conditions for the DARES project. And just to state that the administration had approved that project, being the largest publicly funded energy access program globally within the bank. And with that sort of commitment, it's a huge responsibility to ensure that those funds or whatever commitment we have is yielding the right results. You would agree with me that a lot of the communities that we have these deployments, I mean, you would know because you've actually, boots on the ground, gone into these communities and seen it firsthand. But you'd be shocked the amount of people who don't even know, who don't even have an idea of what you and I are talking about here. All they see is just the money that's spent, and they're wondering, I mean, where's all this impact that you keep talking about? So that was what really inspired this book coming together, to go out to the field and to be able to share stories from the beneficiary. I keep telling the team here that we need to continue to project this program from the lens of the beneficiary, not even from us. It's less of us talking and more of feedback, testimonials from site, so that people in the urban areas who, have no business going into these very rural communities can understand the level of impact. And if I'm looking at specific stories, I'll go into one particular case around, I think it was a pediatrician in Gombe State, either a pediatrician or a gynecologist, one of them, who was speaking about the mortality rate of women giving birth and all of that, where they're trying to work under circumstances where they're giving birth using a torchlight and things like that. Very, very touching stories. And because of one of our deployments under the COVID-100, that story completely changed. And that went across board in the healthcare space. They're able to store basic vaccines, basic drugs that they would, on a normal basis, they won't be able to store without having that level of power. They're able to work for longer hours just because they have that solar system deployed. And when we go across even into the educational sector, in the universities that we've deployed these mini grids, the impact it has had on learning, on the environment for even the teachers, the research units to carry out research in areas that they would never have been able to do without power, and going down to the very rural communities where people who haven't even had access to the grid or access to any power in 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years, God knows, all of a sudden have access to this power. People who have been able to make some form of living out of just having access to that power. We often underestimate the impact of things like the fuel subsidy, for example, removal, or them just having to focus on having these petrol generators to do anything and everything that they have to do. And just having that switch to cleaner and more affordable power is really the difference for them in terms of how they've been able to improve their lives across board. So the stories go on and on. And even from the beneficiaries in terms of the communities or the sectors that we've intervened in, for the developers themselves, I often tell a story about the journey so far. As I said earlier, I was part of the team that negotiated the first project. So I've seen companies who were essentially portfolio companies, right? Let me call it that. That will just go for the one-off contract and everything. And you've seen them in a lot of cases transition into companies that have the corporate governance to be able to raise funding from the likes of IFC. That in itself is impact. You've seen developers who have been able to establish assembly lines for solar home systems, right? We have a female-led company who is actually doing that based off of the impact of the net. So this is really impact across board, and not even speaking to the employment, right? Creating jobs for people across board, and a host of other parameters that, were really highlighted in that photo book.
Great. No, I think one of the impressive things about the work that NEP has done is just the fact that you chose to go to places that no other distribution company would go to, no other agency would go to. It's in the back beyond. So it's really impressive to hear the work. And one thing that we've also assessed is light is great. A light bulb is fantastic, but productive use is what makes it work. If you don't have productive use, the person might not appreciate the light in the long run. But if there's a way they can actually make money from the power, there's a bit more willingness to pay and abilities to pay as well. So well done. So there is plans to electrify almost 20 million Nigerians using decentralized renewable energy. What you achieved with NEP, how would you, I guess, as we would say now, level up the achievement of DARES to ensure that it meets and exceeds all the wonderful achievements that you just shared under NEP?
So in terms of the achievements of DARES and how we plan to do that, I think the name in itself, scale up, right? So everything that we've done in the NEP on this level now is focused around how we can implement this at scale. I spoke earlier about how we have created an enabling environment for developers to improve their corporate governance, to be able to access early project lifecycle financing, to ensure that they're able to deploy more sites at the same time. So when in the NEP, we're looking at companies who are struggling to finance maybe one site, two sites, three sites, you have companies who are then able to, developers or renewable energy service companies, as we now call them, who are now able to bring in portfolio of 10 sites, 20 sites, 30 sites. This creates and continues to allow the ecosystem to mature. If you look at the nexus between this and any other sector you find, I often use the oil and gas sector, for example. The likes of Shell, right, would not be themselves going through the different aspects of the value chain. That's why you have oil services companies and all of that. So if you see this space as a space that is really broken down into three aspects, right? The way I like to look at it is the project development phase, which is the phase where you go out there, you do your site selection, you have your sensitization with the communities, do your project design, systems designs, and all of that. It's project development. It costs money, right? And this is one bottleneck that hindered a lot of companies from delivering at scale initially, right? And these are areas that we're trying to work on to ensure that they're able to access that fund. Then the next level is where you have the EPC deployment. That's the actual construction, procurement of equipment and construction. That's the second aspect. The third aspect is actually the O&M over the life cycle of the project, because an EPC company is very different from a company that can, function as a utility, essentially an O&M company that does its vending and all of that sort of stuff, collections and all of that. So we begin to see how all of this comes together. Before, we just saw it as just one. But now, as you begin to deploy at scale and you begin to look at sustainability, you start to see how each one of these buckets can be a service that feeds this ecosystem. And if we look at it like that, we're able to achieve at the scale that we think or we know that we can achieve. So imagine developing 20 sites at the same time, right? You won't be able to do that as one, but you can get EPC companies that can help you do that concurrently and achieve that at once. These are ways that we are trying to look at to see how we can scale up on what we're doing. And that's just aside from the encouragement, again, I'll keep saying it, of ensuring that we break into the local currency financing. We're also able to get developers to access equity and not just the debt, right? What we call patient money, so that they're able to really drive the process. I think the last area to look at when it comes to the scale we want to achieve is the focus now on interconnected mini-grids. So interconnected mini-grids for me helps to encourage, and that's why we're probably seeing the level of support that we're getting from the DISCOs and NERC, because years ago, the off-grid space was seen as a competition for the grid. So then you'd see a lot of court cases, you see a lot of resistance. But with the interconnected mini-grid, it's almost like franchising. And it's almost helping us, it's not even almost, it is helping us to build the grid from ground up. You spoke earlier about DISCOs not wanting to go into some certain areas. I mean, investment-wise and cost-benefit analysis, to be honest, it doesn't make sense for them to extend the grid all the way to those areas or do. But with interconnected mini-grid, we're able to retrofit at feeder level, provide meters to that franchise area, and also we're able to then ensure that the DISCO itself, get some form of fee. So it's a win-win-win-win for everyone that we're looking to achieve. And you made a good point around productive uses, right? And being targeted around those productive uses. Again, to emphasize that public funding we even have access to, even as I say that it's the largest in the world at the moment. But again, we understand that we have a huge ecosystem. So we have to be targeted. So with the productive use, we have areas such as the economic clusters that we want to encourage. What do we mean by economic clusters? Solar for businesses, markets, right, in a sustainable way. We also focus on the agro-processing industry, the agricultural industry for food security, being able to provide equipment for smallholder farmers, being able to also provide the necessary equipment for processing at that level. This encourages a lot of productivity at those various levels. So these are just a number of areas that we want to use to drive our commitments and our targets under the DARES.
That's really good to know. One thing I picked up from your presentation is around NEP was a great entry point, achieved quite a bit. DARES is the scale-up version of it. And if I can put it together in one word or in a few words, it will be around systematic investment. You're not just coming to invest in one mini grid. You're now saying, but who will use this power? Who are the off-takers? What will the consumers look like? So you're building out the demand even before you get to put it in the mini grid. And then when you now put in the mini grids, you're now scaling. It's not just, oh, let's put one and see what happens. No, there's 100 million Nigerians who don't have access to power. So the journey is not something that needs to take 10 years. It's now. We have to be able to do this or we're going to be left behind. Just wanted to talk a bit about this new initiative, the MISSION300. Could you just tell us a little bit more about how your program is engaging with the MISSION300 initiative?
Thank you for that. So the MISSION300 initiative in itself is a commitment by the World Bank and the AFDB to electrify 300 million Africans in the next few years. Now, this commitment has various pillars.
You said 300 million Africans?
Yes. So it's it's across Africa, right?
Okay. And so I guess the viewpoint is to try to electrify half of the unelectrified in Africa, because I think that number is 600.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
Exactly. Okay. So that's why they call it the M300. And one of the key things that was done, that was accomplished, I think it was in Tanzania in January, was to get the first member countries to sign up to the energy compacts, right? Mm-hmm. And within those energy compacts are they're actionable deliverables for every country to help to achieve their target. Nigeria, I'll speak to Nigeria, for example, has a number of pillars, one of which is the last mile access that the DARES sits within. So it's just to say that the M300 in itself is not just all about the last mile access. It has a lot to do with the grid. It has a lot to do with other aspects around how to really unlock that potential to ensuring that we electrify those 300 million Africans. And within that context, it's good to note that the Nigeria DARES is the first effective energy access project under the M300. Yeah, so again, it's part of the success story, right? And it emphasizes that leadership role that Nigeria is really taking in energy access. As I said earlier, we are now beginning to turn this supposed issue into an opportunity. We are taking that on and running with it really, and ensuring that we don't lose steam in continuing to drive that process. We are seeing a lot of interest from member countries to come for some level of capacity building, knowledge sharing, and a lot is going on around that. It also means that I'm not able to sleep at night, but it's a good problem to have, having so much focus on energy access, really. So I would say the Mission 300 has helped to really, really bring out that focus. And it's gotten the required attention that is needed, even in terms of the funding required to galvanize that funding into the space. So as a country, as a unit, what we've also been focusing on is to ensure that we document our processes as we continue to try to improve on the processes that we went through under the NEP, right? Learn some lessons, iterate. We're starting to also document all those processes so that in terms of knowledge sharing and capacity building, we can help other countries in this regard. We're also improving on our capacities around our MEL framework to ensure that make use of technology, again, to come up with a robust system that can help to track what's going on the field in real time. So this is very, very critical to achieving those targets.
You know how we've always grown up saying that Nigeria is the giant of Africa, and it's something that we've said for a while, but we failed on a number of fronts. But on this front, we're definitely leading and we're definitely ahead. What's that regional collaboration like? Are there other member countries that you're currently working with to kind of show, hey, listen, this is how we've done it, and this is how you're supposed to do it to be able to make the impact that we have? You know, on the on-grid side, you have the West African Power Pool, and they sit together, they talk, they kind of learn from each other. Obviously, they power trade. Are there conversations going on as far as teaching lessons across the border?
So definitely there are lessons. As I said, we've had a lot of requests from countries across the continent, but I see the Mission 300 as a coordination hub, essentially, that can help, to facilitate those types of engagement in a very productive manner. From last year, we had strategically delayed on a number of those engagements because we wanted to ensure that we got the DARES on the way, first, and we got it on the way properly, right? So there was a lot of work that had to be done internally. And again, I had mentioned earlier around the fact that we are also going through a period where we are documenting a lot of these processes and ensuring that we're actually ready to share the right type of knowledge. In the meantime, though, we have been engaged in a few programs that have been facilitated by the World Bank that has brought in a number of countries together. We have been doing that since last year. I think we've attended about 3 or 4 of those summits or conferences. I think we did one in Sierra Leone and a number of other places where those African countries, heard firsthand from us on different aspects of how the project, works, project implementation, various lessons shared, various questions were answered. And most importantly, one thing we kept telling them is that, look, this is Nigeria's story, right? You can use it as a template, but it has to be customized to your own reality because we don't have the same ecosystem or environment within those countries, but we can just continue to share it as a template to allow them improve on those areas.
So just moving on to the generation source, I know solar is definitely the leader in the conversation as what DARES is what is doing in the marketplace. There's been some conversations around other generation sources like wind, biomass, hydro. Are those on the table, or is theirs focused solely on solar?
So we are not focused solely on just one technology, but what we are, trying to encourage is to ensure that, one, what's the least cost technology of electrifying any given community? We're currently working on a national electrification strategy and implementation plan that's going to be backed by what we call an IEP tool, an integrated energy planning tool that the subnationals and key stakeholders in the sector will have access to understand, what technology would best be used to electrify any given community, right? So that would help us, in our technology selection. Even though we, in the past few years or so, are more focused on solar because of the ease of deployment, ENS requirements, safeguards, and all of that. We are also looking to see how other sources can be encouraged, even promoting hybrid solutions across board. There's no reason why we can have hybrid in certain areas that can even help to drop the costs of generation further. So yes, we're looking into these various areas.
That's great to know, because I think from a resource point of view, we have so many natural resources that is currently untapped that next year, with partnership with GWEC, which is a global wind council, we're pushing the Nigerian Wind Energy Council to really start looking at wind energy projects to see how we could get this started. The technology has changed quite a bit, so there's definitely a pathway to get more wind projects in country. So just from a point of view of the audience, how can they get in touch with what's currently happening with DARES? How can they potentially plug in?
So we try to democratize information as much as possible because everything we do is centered around the private sector. So as much as possible, we want to ensure that we're set up in such a way that there's that ease of doing business, as we like to call it, for the private sector to get as much information as they require. We have our website, and the way the program is set up, you have very little. You can go end to end through the application process with little or no human interference. There was a female-led company who signed a grant agreement a few weeks ago, and I had the opportunity to speak to her. And in our conversation, I was so shocked that, look, she said she just went to the website, she went on the Odyssey platform, she studied all the tools that we had up on there. She went to sites, she got her sites, she did her sensitization and all of that, end to end, I kid you not, with no human interference. So that's something we're proud
That's
of.
pretty amazing.
That
I
is
wish
amazing.
every part of government was like that.
Yes. So it's really, really, it's doable, right? That just showed me, that was proof to me that it's doable, and we must be doing something right? But we're constantly trying to make things better, make things easier for everyone. Our website is always available, is www.nep.rea.gov.ng. Odyssey platform is available, and there's an end-to-end on the how to go about different applications. On the Odyssey platform, we have various project pipelines that are available with different criteria. That notwithstanding, we ensure that whenever we get any queries, any issues, we respond, as soon as we can also. So there's a team here that is always available to give directions, give advice, give recommendations, and help companies to pass through that process.
Excellent. Just one key question, and then we'll move on to the last bit. Private sector financing is very critical, right? Because if you're doing grant component on one end, you need private sector capital on the other end to be able to marry these two to make the projects work. What has been the success in getting banks who were very gun shy when it came to renewables 10 years ago, And then the privatization practices obviously made them even further gun shy about the power sector. So how have you been able to build confidence to bring in all this money from the private sector to be able to get these projects to be stood up?
Wonderful question. I spoke about the journey so far, and I can't answer that question without just taking you through a bit of that journey. When we started negotiating the first project, that came about because we had a leadership that was very, very ambitious. We had the first energizing education program funded by the federal government, and that was why it was funded by the federal. That showed commitment, right? And that's really what I feel brought the banks to the table, especially the World Bank, to start to discuss and to negotiate. At that time, stakeholders, even within government, were not too sure of the technology. The developers, well, as I said earlier, most of them were still portfolio companies, right? So we had to design the project in such a way that international companies, the likes of those that are deployed in India and the rest of them, we could at least attract them to start that process, right? The off-takers, right, or beneficiaries, as we call them, the most important, people here, also were not so convinced, or, this was new technology. You hear a lot of people asking, does solar really work? Right? And because you have a market where all kinds of quality of equipments are just brought in at the same time. So you had people with a lot of, varied experiences with these technologies. And the last part, the most important that, you've asked a question about is the finance, right? And the banks and how they view the risk in this sector, and how they felt that we were going to de-risk the sector so much that they could bring their money. They felt comfortable to bring their money in.
Precisely.
Exactly. The first thing I feel that helped a lot was the fact that we were able to sign grant agreements that the financiers saw as instruments of guarantee. Right. Okay. And in order for them to have done that, they had to have seen a track record of project, a track record of disbursements, a track record of payments, and monitored that life cycle over the few years that we've been running it. So it took very brave, I'll call it, on all ends, brave leadership at the REA, brave developers who were, willing to just go into the deep end, a lot of them using their own funds, committing their own funds at the time, right? To get these things going. So it was just, and that's why I emphasized on the fact that it will never be perfect. But once we have that conviction that power is something that is a human right, right? It's a service, it's an enabler, right? It would always thrive at the end of the day, right? So we've been able to create, and the ecosystem has matured over time, where the confidence even within the commercial banks has increased so much over time, to the extent that last week or week before, I had Fidelity Bank, for example, coming to us saying, look, we want to replicate what the likes of FCMB are doing. We want to replicate what the likes of
Sterling Bank. Competition in the space.
Yes, you're bringing competition because, again, the likes of IFC are also committed to the program based off of the way the programs are set up. We're hearing of a lot of finance platforms that have or are being set up based off of the commitment of the MISSION300. There's a facility that is set up by the NSIA, Africa 50, and ISA of India that looks into providing blended financing, equity across board. So the space is definitely open, right? And we are constantly reviewing again our processes to see how we can even continue to de-risk as much as possible to ensure that, again, access to local currency financing. There's a lot of conversations going on across board, even with the CBNs, even with the sovereign wealth funds, even with the pension funds. How we can attract these finances into the ecosystem. You see, energy access is really going to be the foundation of our industrialization, however we want to look at it. And we should see programs like the DARES as enablers, because it's because of the DARES that we've been really able, or the NEP, we've been really able to put together this entire ecosystem, right? Call it because of the project designs or whatever it is. But what we are seeing now is that other players in the sector are doing their projects, even outside the DARES. There are PPAs being signed. There are other CNI projects that are coming on board and all of that. So it's an entire ecosystem thing, right? And, as we move along, we don't even see it as just the DARES. We're seeing it as what is the DARES catalyzing, or what is the DARES helping to catalyze across the entire ecosystem. You see a lot of manufacturers who a few years ago would have told you that, look, this solar technology or the battery storage technology, can it really power my equipment, right? But they have that confidence now. A lot of them are switching, so that level of penetration, and that has even led us, even within the team here, to start to back again to data that, look, we need to be able to monitor the level of solar or renewable penetration in our entire ecosystem to be able to come up with accurate figures. If we look at it just from a point of DARES, we will be missing the point, and we will be missing a lot of the impact that we've had. We'll be underreporting, really. So is there a way that we can begin to record this and to gather this data? These are the real studies. These are the results that are coming up from, what we've been doing over time and what we will continue to do to deepen the penetration in the space.
That's really good. So I think I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. DARES is a springboard that'll be used to industrialize the country.
Yeah.
Because all the industries you mentioned, financiers, manufacturers, and as we know, schools as well, these are the building blocks to be able to really move us in a new direction. Because my biggest fear is we're talking about the Industrial Revolution happened in the West 100+ years ago. The tech revolution happened 30 years ago. Now we're looking at the AI machine learning revolution that's happening now. And the key part of that is you have to have electricity. If you don't have electricity, you're going to miss out on the revolution, and you're going to end up being categorized in the same group as the folks in the Amazon. And we don't want that. We want to be able to use this as a springboard to start competing with the rest of the world. So well done. It doesn't sound like you'll be getting a lot of sleep anytime soon. So finally, what are the key milestones we should be watching out for over the next 2 years?
The ultimate milestone to look forward to is if a Nigeria DARES 2 is announced. And that would be happening because of the level of interest and the level of impact that this program will have. And that is a very loaded statement if you begin to unpack it. That just says a few things. In the last few months, in the applications that we've seen and the level of interest that we've seen on the programs, we're seeing that we are getting this as a rate that is almost 5 times more than what we had under the NEP, right? We're seeing that across board, we are definitely going to achieve and even surpass a lot of our targets. But just to bring this even more granular, we've started signing grant agreements under isolated mini-grid deployments. I think the targets right now in this quarter, I think right now we're at over about 100 sites. Just to put that into context for you, is that the NEP was able to do about 180 sites, and only in the last few months we have been able to sign over 100, and we have over 200 under review. So that's just to show you the rate at which we are moving. We are at the RFP review level for the first 12 lots, 40 sites for the interconnected mini grids that we have. And that should also be finalized within the next month. We're also opening other pipelines under the mini grid side for also interconnected mini grids, but performance-based, the performance-based ground windows. And under the SHS as well, we're seeing very, very encouraging figures there in terms of deployments and what we see that's already verified on our Odyssey platforms as well. We're also looking to open up, other pipelines like I explained earlier around solar for businesses, agricultural processing in the next month or so. So we have a very, very busy period. And as I said, the ultimate goal is really to ensure that we're able to achieve the DARES 2, probably a personal goal for me, and to ensure we're able to really use this limited public financing to go as far as we can in closing this energy access gap.
That is really good to know, because I think when programs come and go, there's a bit of disruption in the marketplace. So announcing this program 2 years into or 3 years into the DARES 1 would give a pathway of sustainability, of people being able to plan, and also of economies of scale, right? Because if you start for 5 years, stop and wait for the program to be approved, it creates a bit of a lag, and bad things happen when they're lagged. So it's really important to get this approval done. So really, just from a point of view of wrapping up, let the Next Year team know how we can help in amplifying some of the work that DARES has done and any other tools you might need, because for us, we're super happy and super excited to support this effort, because when we met REA, when I came into the sector in 2013, it was not a very favorable place to be associated with, just given the issues that they were having at the time. But given the leadership of Dami and the folks and yourself and just the entire agency, it's transformed to a very good place and to the star of the sector. So please let us know how we can help that going forward.
Definitely. We'll continually, next year is one of very important partners, done so much together. We've been able to achieve so much together. I think just, you're one of those people that you've seen the system evolve and mature over time. So you're actually part and parcel of the journey so far. So as we continue to make progress, we would definitely continue to collaborate in every area that we can to make this, the success that we desire.
Thank you so much, Femi. And having you join has been a pleasure. We've run over because the conversation's so rich, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.